Hello and welcome to Psychology 1001, General Psychology. So now let's start our first area of course content, scientific thinking. So for this unit, we're just going to go over the basics of the scientific method and the science that underlies all of psychology. So in general, psychology is the scientific study of mind and behavior. And so our behavior is composed of factors that influence it, like our interactions that we have with others, but also things like biology. So when you're around certain people, you might behave a certain way and in certain environments. But there also can be things like genetic factors that influence how you behave. And so as a result of these two components, psychology is both a social and biological science, where we look at the mind and behavior through both of these lenses. Next, we'll watch a short video from Crash Course that will give you an idea of an overview of the field of psychology and its major historical figures.
That dream about the dinosaur and the leotard. Those times that you said that thing that you know you shouldn't have said, or even that thing you didn't even know you were gonna say. The little cogs of your consciousness cranking away, making your life possible, making society function, all of the things that you're so glad you can do, and all of the ones you wish you could stop doing. Excluding other human minds, your mind is the most complicated piece of the universe that humans currently know about. The rules that govern it are mysterious and elusive. Maybe our brains just aren't complex enough to understand themselves, but that's not going to stop us from trying. The word psychology comes from the Latin for the study of the soul, and while its formal definition has evolved over the last several decades, today we can safely call it the science of behavior and mental processes. The term psychology wasn't coined until around the turn of the 16th century, and a practice that we would actually call science today wasn't established until the mid-1800s. But of course, humans have always been curious about themselves and what's going on up here. Aristotle pondered the seed of human consciousness and decided that it was in the heart, not the head, being, as we have seen quite a lot here on Crash Course, absolutely and completely wrong. 2,000 years ago, Chinese rulers conducted the world's first psychological exams requiring public officials to take personality and intelligence tests. And in the late 800s, Persian Dr. Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi, also known as Razis, was one of the first to describe mental illness and even treated patients in what was essentially a very early psych ward in his Baghdad hospital. From the efforts of those early thinkers up until today, the field of psychology has been all about tackling some of the big questions. How can humans do horrible things like commit genocide and torture other humans, and how come we know those things are horrible? Do we have free will, or are we simply driven by our environment, biology, and non-conscious influences? What is mental illness, and what can we do about it? And what is consciousness, or the notion of self? If I lose my awareness of myself, am I still human? I don't know! But over the next 6 months, these are the questions that we're going to be exploring together. How our brains work, how they can break, how they can be healed, why we behave the way we do even when we don't want to, and what it means to be thinking and feeling and alive. When hearing the word psychology, most people probably think of a therapist listening to a patient unpacking the details of his day while reclining on a couch. Maybe that therapist is wearing glasses, chewing on a cigar, stroking his whiskered chin. Admit it, if you're thinking about psychology, you're probably picturing Freud. Sigmund Freud was one of the most tremendously influential and controversial thinkers of his time, maybe of all time. His theories helped build our views on childhood, personality, dreams, and sexuality, and his work fueled a legacy of both support and opposition. His life was long and spanned an important swath of history from the American Civil War to World War II. But like most great scientists, Freud developed his revolutionary ideas by building on the work of others. And of course, innovation in the field didn't stop with him. In truth, psychology is one of the most wildly diverse sciences in terms of the questions it proposes, the methods it applies, and the different schools of thought and disciplines it contains. Perhaps more than any other science, psychology is just a big old integrative melting pot. For instance, right around Freud's time, there were a lot of different schools of thought about how the study of the human mind should be tackled. Mainly, there were the ideas of structuralism, functionalism, and psychoanalysis. Scientific psychology got its start in 1879 in Germany when physician Wilhelm Wundt set up the first psychology laboratory at the University of Leipzig just a few years after publishing his Principles of Physiological Psychology, considered the first true psychology textbook. Wundt and his student Edward Bradford Titchener took cues from chemists and physicists and argued that if those people could break down all matter into simple elements or structures, why couldn't they do the same for the brain? They tried to understand the structures of consciousness by getting patients to look inward, asking them how they felt when they watched a sunset or smelled a coffee or licked a kitten or whatever. Titchener named this approach structuralism, but despite its rigid-sounding name, it really relied so much on introspection that it became too subjective. I mean, you may sense and feel something different than I do, even if we lick the same kitten. Psychologists, of course, can't actually observe a patient's inner thoughts or feelings, so ultimately the structuralist school of thought was fairly short-lived. By contrast, American physician and philosopher William James proposed a different set of questions, focusing on why we think and feel and smell and lick or whatever. Basically, he focused on the function of behavior. This approach, functionalism, was inspired by Charles Darwin's idea that adaptive behaviors are conserved throughout the evolutionary process. James published his seminal book, The Principles of Psychology, in 1890, defining psychology as the science of mental life, just as Freud was starting to flex his big brain. Sigmund Freud began his medical career at a Viennese hospital, but in 1886, he started his own practice specializing in nervous disorders. During this time, Freud witnessed his colleague Joseph Breuer treat a patient called Anna O with a new talking cure. Basically, it just let her talk about her symptoms. The more she talked and pulled up traumatic memories, the more her symptoms were reduced. It was a breakthrough, and it changed Freud forever. From then on, Freud encouraged his patients to talk freely about whatever came to mind, to free associate. This technique provided the basis for his career and an entire branch of psychology. In 1900, he published his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, where he introduced his theory of psychoanalysis. Now, you probably think of psychoanalysis as a treatment, the whole patient on the couch scenario, and that's definitely part of it. But Freud's concept was actually a lot more complex than that, and it was revolutionary. The radical kernel of psychoanalysis was the theory that our personalities are shaped by unconscious motives. Basically, Freud suggested that we're all profoundly affected by mental processes that we're not even aware of. Now that sounds almost obvious to us now, but part of the genius of Freud's theory was that in 1900, it wasn't obvious at all. The idea that our minds could be driven by something that our minds themselves didn't know about was hard to grasp. As hard as, maybe organisms evolving by natural selection. It was abstract, invisible, and there was something about it that seemed irrational. But the other important part of Freud's theory was that the subconscious, literally the thing below consciousness, was still discoverable. Even though you weren't aware of it, you could come to understand it through a therapeutic technique that used dreams, projections, and free association to root out repressed feelings and gain self-insight. So what Freud was really saying was that mental disorders could be healed through talk therapy and self-discovery. And this was a really big breakthrough, because prior to this, people with mental illnesses would be confined to sanatoriums and at best given menial labor to do, and at worst, shackled to a bed frame. After the interpretation of dreams, Freud went on to publish over 20 more books and countless papers with an iconic cigar in hand all the while. He believed smoking helped him think, but it also helped him get jaw cancer. During the last 16 years of his life, he underwent at least 30 painful operations while continuing to smoke. By the late 1930s, the Nazis had taken over Austria, and Freud and his Jewish family narrowly escaped to England. By September 1939, the pain in his cancerous jaw was too great, and a doctor friend assisted him in suicide through morphine injection. He was 83. Whether you love him or hate him, and make no mistake, plenty of people vehemently disagreed with him, there is no question that Freud's impact on psychology was monumental. While competing theories in the young field of psychology either fell away or evolved into something else, psychoanalysis remains an important concept and practice today. The next big shakeup rolled in during the first half of the 20th century when behaviorism gained a higher profile. Heavy hitters like Ivan Pavlov, John B. Watson, and B.F. Skinner were key players here. They focused on the study of observable behavior. You may remember Skinner as the dude who put rats and pigeons and babies in boxes and conditioned them to perform certain behaviors. Right around when Freud escaped to England, Skinner published his Behavior of Organisms, ushering in the era of behaviorism, which remained all the rage well into the 1960s. The other major force at the time was, of course, Freud's psychoanalysis and its many descendants, collectively known as the psychodynamic theories. These focused on the importance of early experiences in shaping the unconsciousness and how that process affects our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and personalities. By the mid-20th century, other major forces in psychology were also brewing. Schools we'll explore later in this course, including humanist psychology, which focuses on nurturing personal growth, cognitive science, and neuroscience, all of which contributed their own unique takes on the study of mind. Today's formal definition of psychology, the study of behavior and mental processes, is a nice amalgamation that pulls from all these different schools of thought. It recognizes the need for observing and recording behavior, whether that's screaming, crying, or playing air saxophone to an imaginary audience, but it also gives credit to our mental processes, what we think and feel and believe while we're tearing it up on our invisible instruments. Because again, the point that I really want you to take home is that psychology is an integrative science. Yes, folks still get grumpy and disagree plenty, but the essence of the discipline has everything to do with creating different ways of asking interesting questions and attempting to answer them through all kinds of data gathering methods. The human mind is complicated. There is no single way to effectively crack it open. It must be pried at from all sides. Harvard astronomer Owen Gingerich has gazed into the distant horizons of space, and even he has acknowledged that the human brain is by far the most complex physical object known to us in the entire cosmos. And we all get to have one of our very own, just knocking around right up in here. We here at Crash Course are really excited to spend the next several months delving into the world of psychology, how it applies to our lives, our minds, and our hearts, and how it deepens our understanding of each other, our world, and ourselves.
So let's go into some more detail on some of the content in the Crash Course video in scientific thinking in general. So there's two classes of thought about how we can learn about the world around us. The first one is empiricism, which is the viewpoint that knowledge mostly comes from using your senses to observe the world. And so this school of thought is supported by philosophers like John Locke, who thinks humans are born as tabula rasa, or blank slates, and we're shaped by things like our environment that influence who we become. Additionally, Aristotle thought that we learn by our personal experience, and so this is closely related to the concept of using senses to observe the world. On the other hand, we have rationalism, which is the viewpoint that knowledge mostly comes from intellectual reasoning. So from this point of view, humans are born with innate knowledge, and even though we can't experience everything in the world, we can still discover facts about it and learn about things by thinking and reflecting and using logical reasoning. And so the scientific method combines both of these classes of thoughts by using both observation and reasoning to search and generate new knowledge. So we use rationalism to develop theories and hypotheses, and then we test those theories and hypotheses by collecting data systematically according to empiricism. So let's demonstrate the scientific method and how it can be useful. So to do this, we're going to look at horoscopes and how accurate your sign is. So take a moment to find when your birthday is and what sign you are, and read what your horoscope says about you. So if your birthday is January 20th through July 22nd, you'll be one of the signs on this slide. So if that's you, feel free to pause the video here and just read your horoscope. Next, here is the rest of the birthdays and the rest of the signs. So again, just feel free to pause the video and read your horoscope if that applies to you. So now take a moment to reflect. How well do you think your horoscope described you? think to yourself how you would rate it on this scale, from not like me at all on one end, and then on the other end, very much like me. If you relate to your horoscope a lot, select that option, and just think to yourself what you would choose. So if you're like most people, you would tend to choose quite like me or very much like me. So in general, people tend to really relate to horoscopes and find that they accurately describe who they are. But what if I told you that the information in those horoscopes that I gave you earlier was actually all made up? And instead of belonging to the correct signs, I switched the descriptions of horoscopes out so that they were all mismatched and the wrong signs had the wrong horoscopes. How could we explain how people tend to relate to their horoscopes in that case? When this experiment is replicated, we find that even though the horoscopes are not correct, people do tend to relate to them. But why do people believe in horoscopes? And why are people similarly fooled often by pseudoscience personality tests? The reason why is because people have cognitive biases. So sometimes when we're considering things, we give disproportionate weight against or for a certain idea or thing. So we're not considering things logically and we're biased towards one interpretation. One example of this is the Barnum effect, which describes how individuals give really high accuracy ratings to descriptions of their personality that are supposedly tailored to them, but in fact, these descriptions are really vague and they apply to a wide range of people. So it makes sense that they're likely to agree with them just because they apply to most people. Next, people also exhibit self-serving bias, which describes the tendency to explain successes as due to internal characteristics. So when something good happens to us, we tend to think that we were the ones who made it happen, or it's aspects of us that are responsible for the outcome. So if we do really good on a test, we think, it's because I'm really smart or I studied hard. And then on the other hand, we tend to explain our failures as due to situational factors or external factors that are not a part of us. So if we, on the other hand, did bad on a test, maybe we're much more likely to blame it on the professor and say, they didn't do a good job of preparing me. I wouldn't have failed if they were a better teacher. But you're much less likely to view the teacher as responsible for your success when you do good on the test. And this bias serves to protect our self-esteem so that even when we make mistakes, we don't end up feeling bad about ourselves and we can still go about the world with confidence. Lastly, confirmation bias can contribute to this. And that describes the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of the beliefs and theories that we already hold. So, if we already believe that we have certain personality characteristics, and then we're told information that confirms that, that could strengthen our belief in thinking that the horoscopes or personality tests are actually correct. However, it's not necessarily true that the information we believe about ourselves is correct. So confirmation bias could just play a role in making us think it's correct. But in general, people have a tendency to ignore this evidence that disproves our ideas or beliefs. And so for these reasons, we need the scientific method to help us get to the truth. Because if we just asked individuals what their opinions are, we can't be free of these biases. Another reason why we need the scientific method is because people tend to believe in illusory truths. That is, they tend to believe information is correct if they're exposed to it repeatedly over and over, even if it's totally false. And one example of this is the idea that humans only use 10% of their brains at any given time. This is actually totally incorrect, but it's been really widely spread, and so lots of people believe it anyways just because they've seen it so many times. They think it's probably true. Additionally, belief perseverance is another reason why we need science. And this describes how people hold on to their beliefs, even sometimes when there's really strong evidence showing that they're wrong. So, for example, people who believe the earth is flat ignore scientific evidence to the contrary that proves the earth is round, and they still hold on to that belief just because they believe in it so strongly. Another example that's more benign is, let's say that you're a really good cook and people always compliment your dishes, but one time you end up messing up and say you burn something or add too much salt or too little. That doesn't mean that you're a bad cook necessarily, and you don't have to question that belief just because you made one mistake. So even though there's some evidence to the contrary, belief perseverance can help us restore our faith in ourselves and our self-esteem. And so just to show how strong the power of belief perseverance can be, I have a slide of some famous flat earthers who, despite evidence to the contrary, still believe or believed in flat earth conspiracy theory. So the first is Kyrie Irving, basketball player. He stated at one point in 2017 that it's not a conspiracy and the earth is flat. So to Kyrie's credit, he did end up apologizing the next year in 2018. Specifically, he apologized to all the science teachers out there, and he said he just didn't understand what effect his comments could have and how he could shape other people's beliefs. And next, rapper B.O.B. Believed so strongly in flat earth that he ended up getting in a Twitter feud with astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson about it, and even after that, he still wasn't convinced. Then they ended up putting out a series of diss tracks against each other, which just goes to show the power of belief perseverance. And here's some screenshots of the Twitter fight. But these examples show that, even if you're a highly successful individual, you're still susceptible to the same things as everybody else, like belief perseverance. So, next, let's talk about how confirmation bias can affect our news consumption. To give another example of how these cognitive biases might affect you in your daily life. So, as we said earlier, confirmation bias describes the tendency to ignore evidence that disproves our ideas or beliefs. And so modern internet culture relates to confirmation bias in a really interesting way. So let's watch a video of a TED Talk talking about confirmation bias in the way we consume news today.
Mark Zuckerberg, a journalist, was asking him a question about the news feed. And the journalist was asking him, why is this so important? And Zuckerberg said, a squirrel dying in your front yard may be more relevant to your interests right now than people dying in Africa. And I want to talk about what a web based on that idea of relevance might look like. So when I was growing up in a really rural area in Maine, the internet meant something very different to me. It meant a connection to the world. It meant something that would connect us all together. And I was sure that it was going to be great for democracy and for our society. But there's this kind of shift in how information is flowing online, and it's invisible. And if we don't pay attention to it, it could be a real problem. So I first noticed this in a place I spend a lot of time, my Facebook page. I'm progressive politically, big surprise, but I've always gone out of my way to meet conservatives. I like hearing what they're thinking about. I like seeing what they link to. I like learning a thing or two. And so I was kind of surprised when I noticed one day that the conservatives had disappeared from my Facebook feed. And what it turned out was going on was that Facebook was looking at which links I clicked on. And it was noticing that actually I was clicking more on my liberal friends' links than on my conservative friends' links. And without consulting me about it, it had edited them out. They disappeared. So Facebook isn't the only place that's doing this kind of invisible algorithmic editing of the web. Google's doing it too. If I search for something and you search for something, even right now at the very same time, we may get very different search results. Even if you're logged out, one engineer told me, there are 57 signals that Google looks at. Everything from what kind of computer you're on, to what kind of browser you're using, to where you're located, that it uses to personally tailor your query results. Think about it for a second. There is no standard Google anymore. And the funny thing about this is that it's hard to see. You can't see how different your search results are from anyone else's. But a couple of weeks ago, I asked a bunch of friends to Google Egypt and to send me screenshots of what they got. So here's my friend Scott's screenshot, and here's my friend Daniel's screenshot. When you put them side by side, you don't even have to read the links to see how different these two pages are. But when you do read the links, it's really quite remarkable. Daniel didn't get anything about the protests in Egypt at all in his first page of Google results. Scott's results were full of them. And this was the big story of the day at that time. That's how different these results are becoming. So it's not just Google and Facebook either. This is something that's sweeping the web. There are a whole host of companies that are doing this kind of personalization. Yahoo News, the biggest news site on the internet, is now personalized. Different people get different things. Huffington Post, Washington Post, New York Times, all flirting with personalization in various ways. And where this moves us very quickly toward a world in which the internet is showing us what it thinks we want to see, but not necessarily what we need to see. As Eric Schmidt said, it'll be very hard for people to watch or consume something that has not, in some sense, been tailored for them. So I do think this is a problem. And I think if you take all of these filters together, if you take all of these algorithms, you get what I call a filter bubble. And your filter bubble is kind of your own personal, unique universe of information that you live in online. And what's in your filter bubble depends on who you are, and it depends on what you do. But the thing is that you don't decide what gets in. And more importantly, you don't actually see what gets edited out. So one of the problems with the filter bubble was discovered by some researchers at Netflix. And they were looking at the Netflix queues, and they noticed something kind of funny that a lot of us probably have noticed, which is there's some movies that just sort of zip right up and out to our houses. They enter the queue, they just zip right out. So Iron Man zips right out, right? And Waiting for Superman can wait for a really long time. What they discovered was that in our Netflix queues, there's kind of this epic struggle going on between our future aspirational selves and our more impulsive present selves. We all want to be someone who has watched Rashomon. But right now, we want to watch Ace Ventura for the 4th time. So the best editing gives us a bit of both. It gives us a little bit of Justin Bieber and a little bit of Afghanistan. It gives us some information vegetables. It gives us some information dessert. And the challenge with these kind of algorithmic filters, these personalized filters, is that because they're mainly looking at what you click on first, it can throw off that balance. And instead of a balanced information diet, you can end up surrounded by information junk food. So what this suggests is actually that we may have the story about the internet wrong. In a broadcast society, this is how the founding mythology goes, right? In a broadcast society, there were these gatekeepers, the editors, and they controlled the flows of information. And along came the internet, and it swept them out of the way, and it allowed all of us to connect together, and it was awesome. But that's not actually what's happening right now. What we're seeing is more of a passing of the torch from human gatekeepers to algorithmic ones. And the thing is that the algorithms don't yet have the kind of embedded ethics that the editors did. So if algorithms are going to curate the world for us, if they're going to decide what we get to see and what we don't get to see, then we need to make sure that they're not just keyed to relevance. We need to make sure that they also show us things that are uncomfortable or challenging or important. This is what TED does, right? Other points of view. And the thing is, we've actually kind of been here before as a society. In 1915, it's not like newspapers were sweating a lot about their civic responsibilities. Then people kind of noticed that they were doing something really important. That in fact, you couldn't have a functioning democracy if citizens didn't get a good flow of information. That the newspapers were critical because they were acting as the filter, and that journalistic ethics developed. It wasn't perfect, but it got us through the last century. And so now, we're kind of back in 1915 on the web. And we need the new gatekeepers to encode that kind of responsibility into the code that they're writing. I know there are a lot of people here from Facebook and from Google, Larry and Sergey, who, people who have helped build the web as it is, and I'm grateful for that. But we really need you to make sure that these algorithms have encoded in them a sense of the public life, a sense of civic responsibility. We need you to make sure that they're transparent enough that we can see what the rules are that determine what gets through our filters. And we need you to give us some control so that we can decide what gets through and what doesn't. Because I think we really need the internet to be that thing that we all dreamed of it being. We need it to connect us all together. We need it to introduce us to new ideas and new people and different perspectives. And it's not going to do that if it leaves us all isolated in a web of one. Thank you. Thank you.
And so to finish up, I'm just going to go over the basics of what the participation assignment will be for this lecture. So this will be posted to Brightspace as mentioned earlier, but for the first participation assignment, I'm just curious for you to write your names for me. If you have a preferred name that's different than the one that I might see on Brightspace or the one that's in your CUNY first, please just let me know so I can use that name to refer to you. Also let me know what your intended majors are if you have any yet. Then I'd also like to hear one of your favorite TV shows, musical artists, a hobby you have or an interest, anything like that that you'd like to share, something that you enjoy doing or a favorite of yours. Just let me know kind of one detail about you and your life. And lastly, I'd like you to reflect on and answer the place that you'd most like to travel to. After that, there will be a short video that you can watch about how to get the most out of your studying that hopefully can help you throughout this course as you prepare for exams. And so the link to this will again be posted on Brightspace, and there's one short discussion question that you'll answer. Thank you so much for watching this lecture, and I'd just like to welcome you again to the class. I'm really excited for the semester together, and just again, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out to me at any time if you need any help with anything also. I'm always happy to help you out. All right, thanks so much again. After that, there will be a short video that you can watch about how to get the most out of your studying that hopefully can help you throughout this course as you prepare for exams. And so the link to this will again be posted on Brightspace, and there's one short discussion question that you'll answer. Thank you so much for watching this lecture, and I'd just like to welcome you again to the class. I'm really excited for the semester together, and just again, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out to me at any time if you need any help with anything also. I'm always happy to help you out.